All right, so we're back for another deep dive. We love to look at what's new in the photography world, and today's no exception. We've got something that just popped up, actually. In fact, it was announced yesterday, March 20th, 2025, the Fujifilm GFX100Rf camera.
It's hot off the presses.
It is hot off the presses, announced in Prague, and we are fortunate enough to have a source for this deep dive, an F-Stoppers article by Anja Vecek, who actually got some hands-on time right there at the announcement.
So we're getting first impressions.
We're going to use very initial thoughts, and I think that's kind of exciting, right? To see what someone thinks kind of right off the bat before the hype machine really kicks in and all the YouTube videos come out.
Well, and before all the, the reviews and the, in-depth analysis and stuff. So yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah, just real quick, what's interesting, what are the things to focus on and what's the mission for this deep dive, I think, is to really understand what's interesting, what's potentially groundbreaking about this camera, and what were Anja's main takeaways from actually using it.
Yeah, and, beyond just what the specs are, but why did Fujifilm design this camera like this, and what are they trying to achieve?
Right, exactly. And what I found really interesting right out of the gate is that this camera is surprisingly small.
Yeah, he makes a point of that in the article.
Yeah, it's lighter than the GFX50R, which is already a pretty compact medium format camera, and it's even lighter than a Fujifilm X-T5 with a kit lens.
Wow.
So right away you're thinking, okay, this is not your typical medium format DSLR beast,
Right. He was comparing it to the X Pro series, like in terms of thickness.
Yeah, so it's got that nice kind of rangefinder style, and I think for a lot of people who shoot with like the X Pro series, that's going to be a very welcome kind of form factor.
Yeah, very familiar.
Yeah, of course that does mean that it doesn't have a deep DSLR style grip.
Right, of course.
But it's all about being compact and lightweight.
Yeah, and, portable and kind of discreet, I guess.
Absolutely. And then when we start looking at the controls, it seems like they've taken kind of a blend of what we've seen on other Fujifilm cameras.
Sure. Yeah, he talks about the control layout.
Yeah, so the shutter speed dial's in back.
Oh, nice.
Which is, I think, going to make a lot of Fujifilm fans very happy. And it has that built-in ISO dial, just like we saw in the X100V.
Right, a classic Fujifilm design.
Yeah, exactly. And it works very similarly, except because this new sensor goes down to ISO 80, they've had to adapt it slightly. So the higher ISO values, 10,000 and 12,800, are accessed through the C position on the dial.
I see.
So you would land on C, and then you would probably use one of the command dials, either the front or the rear, to cycle through those.
So it's like a nested menu, almost.
Yeah, exactly. And then the aperture ring is present on the lens, of course, being a fixed lens.
Right.
But he notes that the little handles on the aperture ring are a little bit more pronounced and round compared to what we see on the X100 series.
Okay, a little easier to grip.
Yeah, a little more tactile, a little easier to grip, and I think that's always a nice touch.
Little details matter, yeah.
Now, the front of the camera is where things start to get really interesting in terms of controls.
Okay, what have they done?
So there's this new arrangement of rockers and dials that are all kind of stacked vertically.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, and it's kind of a cool way to organizing things. So right at the top is the on-off switch, which is actually very tactile.
Okay, so it's not like a little flimsy switch.
No, it's a nice positive click, and that's always nice when you can find things by feel.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
Especially when you're out shooting. You don't want to have to be looking at the camera all the time.
Fumbling around.
Right, exactly. And then below that is the front command dial, which is wider than their standard dials and feels really good to use.
Okay, so a little bit more ergonomic.
Yeah, very ergonomic, and that's going to be the dial that you use for those custom settings.
All right.
And then at the very bottom of this stack is a walker switch that controls the digital focal length crop.
Oh, okay, so you can actually crop in digitally.
Yeah, which is interesting because you've got this huge 102 megapixel sensor.
Right, so you've got a lot of resolution to play with.
So you can crop in quite a bit and still have a very usable image.
It makes me wonder how people are going to use that, Are they going to be thinking about cropping in when they're composing?
Yeah, it definitely adds a new dimension to the shooting process, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And then there's another rocker switch on the side of the camera, and this one controls the aspect ratio preview and the view mode.
So you can quickly change between the different aspect ratios.
Exactly. And speaking of aspect ratios, that's one of the features that Anja was really excited about.
Okay, tell me about this.
So they've added a dedicated aspect ratio dial to the back of the camera.
A whole dial just for aspect ratios?
An entire dial just for aspect ratios.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. And it shows that they're really thinking about how people are going to use this camera and the kind of images they're going to create.
So it's not just an afterthought, it's like baked into the design.
Yeah, it's a very intentional design choice, and it's not just your standard 4.3 and 3.2 options.
Okay, what else is there?
So you've got those, of course, but you also have 1.2, 16.9,
okay,
3.4, and then it gets really interesting. You've got 65.24 and 17.6.
Those are some unusual ones.
Those are the really unusual ones, and those are a direct nod to some classic analog panoramic cameras.
Oh, okay, like what kind of cameras are we talking about?
So the Fujifilm TX1 and TX2, which some people might know as the Hasselblad X-Pan and X-Pan 2,
Right.
and also the medium format Fujifilm GX677.
Okay, so those are some serious panoramic cameras.
Yeah, these are legendary cameras known for their unique wide perspectives.
So by putting those aspect ratios on a dial, it's almost like they're inviting you to shoot in that style.
Yeah, it's not just a feature, it's almost like a philosophy.
Like a way of seeing the world differently.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that you can capture those ultra-wide panoramic images in a single frame with about 50 megapixels of resolution.
Oh, wow. So you're not losing any resolution even though you're shooting this wide aspect ratio.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And Andre was especially smitten with that 17.6 aspect ratio.
He really liked that one.
Yeah, I said it completely changes the way you frame your shots. And he even joked that if he owned the camera, the dial would probably be glued to that position.
I can see that it's a very evocative kind of format.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes you think about the world in a different way.
Now, of course, this being a fixed lens camera, the lens choice is going to be a big topic of conversation.
Right. And that fixed 35mm lens is what allows them to make the camera so compact in the first place.
Right, because it can be a much simpler optical design.
Exactly. It doesn't have to extend out as much, and it can sit closer to the sensor.
And on a medium format sensor, that 35mm lens gives you a 28mm equivalent field of view.
Yeah, which is a classic focal length for street photography documentary work.
Exactly, very versatile.
But the trade-off, and this is a big one, is that the maximum aperture is f4.
Okay, that's not super fast.
No, it's not ideal for low-light situations, and Anji mentions in the article that he was already finding himself shooting at ISO 12,800 with shutter speeds below 150th of a second.
And with a 102 megapixel sensor, you really need to be careful about those shutter speeds.
Absolutely, you don't want any camera shake.
Right, you want to make sure you're getting the most out of that resolution.
And this is where another key point comes in. There's no in-body image stabilization.
Oh, there's no IBIS?
No IBIS, and there's also no optical image stabilization in the lens.
So no stabilization at all?
None whatsoever.
Wow, okay, that's a bold choice.
It is a bold choice, and it really reinforces the idea that this camera is designed for a specific type of photography.
Right, it's not for everyone.
And even though it has microphone and headphone jacks,
Right, he mentions it.
Andre really emphasizes that this is a stills camera first and foremost.
It's all about that image quality.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about that sensor because it's the heart of this camera.
Okay, it's a 102 megapixel sensor.
It is, and it's the same second-generation 102 megapixel see-off sensor that we saw in the GFX100 II.
Okay, so it's a proven sensor.
Yeah, this sensor is known for its incredible resolving power.
Right, 102 megapixels is no joke.
No, it's not. And what's impressive is that it has pretty fast phase detection autofocus, especially for a medium format system.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and a burst shooting speeds are decent too, again, considering it's a medium format camera.
So it's no slouch in terms of performance.
No, not at all. And all that resolution gives you a lot of flexibility, so you can use the digital teleconverter mode.
Right, because you can just crop in.
Yeah, and you can do those creative aspect ratio crops without sacrificing too much detail.
That's a big advantage.
Absolutely, and the image quality in general is just phenomenal.
Yeah, what does Andre have to say about that?
He talks about the dynamic range, the noise control at high ISOs, the sharpness, it's all there.
So it's living up to the medium format expectations.
Oh, absolutely no compromises there.
Now, it's always interesting to see what a reviewer's kind of distilled likes and dislikes are. So what did Andre come up with?
Okay, so in the likes column, we've got a pretty long list.
All right, let's hear it.
So the compact body, the lightweight design, the precise build quality.
Okay, he liked the feel of it.
Yeah, very much so. And then the tactile controls, that innovative aspect ratio, dial the redesigned front controls.
Okay.
Dual SD card slots, a large battery, the leaf shutter mechanism, a tilting screen.
Okay, that's good.
And, of course, stellar image quality, reliable autofocus, a crisp viewfinder.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive list.
It is. It's a very positive review overall.
So what about the dislikes then? What were the things that he wasn't so keen on?
So the main one, and this is kind of expected, is the f4 maximum aperture.
Yeah, we talked about that.
But he acknowledges that it's probably a necessary trade-off to get the camera this small.
Sure.
And the other minor thing is that you need to have JPEG files enabled in order for the aspect ratio dial to work.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so if you're a RAW shooter, you're going to have to enable JPEGs as well.
So it's not just a preview in the EVF or on the LCD, it's actually baking it into the JPEG.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, it's a little quirk, but it's not a deal breaker.
No, not necessarily now in terms of who this camera is for. Andre doesn't really see it as a primary wedding camera.
Yeah, the f4 aperture is going to be limiting in those low-light reception venues.
Right.
But he thinks it would be fantastic for street photography documentary work.
Yeah, I can see that.
That 28mm equivalent field of view is classic for those genres.
Exactly.
And the autofocus is fast enough. The tracking seems to be reliable from what he could tell in his limited testing.
Okay.
And he was really impressed with the colors that this camera produces.
So it's got that Fujifilm look.
Yeah, that beautiful color rendition.
Yeah.
And he really sees it as an always-on-you kind of camera because it's so small, the battery life is great, and it's got those features like dual SD card slots and the tilting screen that make it very versatile.
Yeah, it sounds like a really nice package overall.
Yeah, it definitely does now, beyond just onto his thoughts. The Stoppers article also included some comments from readers, and I thought it would be interesting to highlight a couple of those.
Yeah, always good to get some different perspectives.
So there's a comment from Ken Barris dated March 21st, 2025, and he was quite disappointed about the lack of IBIS.
Yeah, he really wanted IBIS.
Yeah, he says that for someone with shaky hands, it's a deal breaker.
I can understand that, especially with a 102 megapixel sensor.
Right. You really need all the help you can get to keep those images sharp.
And then there was a comment from Julian Phillips, also from March 21st, 2025, and they liked the trend of professional compact cameras, but they were also kind of bummed about the lack of IBIS.
Yeah, they echoed that sentiment.
And they made an interesting point about the f4 lens. They said that we've seen compact lenses with f1.8 apertures.
Right.
So why is this one f4? And they kind of suggested that it might be a compromise because of the larger medium format sensor.
That's a good point. It's a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't always have everything.
No, and it seems like Fujifilm has prioritized compactness in this design, even if it means a slightly slower lens.
Right, and no stabilization.
So to kind of wrap things up, what are the key takeaways here? What should our listeners be thinking about?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that the GFX100RF is a very unique camera. It's offering that medium format image quality in a very compact body.
Yeah, it's a very different approach to medium format photography.
And it's got some interesting features like that dedicated aspect ratio dial.
Yeah, that's a real standout feature.
But it's important to remember the trade-offs. The f4 aperture, the lack of stabilization, those are things that you need to consider.
Right, this camera's not going to be for everyone.
But for the right photographer, it could be an amazing tool.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good point to end on. You know, as technology continues to evolve, we're seeing these more specialized cameras emerge.
Right, cameras that are designed for specific purposes.
And it makes you wonder how those choices are going to influence the way we approach photography.
Yeah, how will these new tools shape our creativity?
It's an exciting time to be a photographer, that's for sure.
Definitely so much to explore.
All right, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.